For my note cards. Global carbon pollution, the ever-present threat that one day our world is going to be overrun with smog and soot that we just can't get rid of. So how are we supposed to remove that threat from our world? I'm here today to tell you that there are many different solutions that people have proposed, but by far there is one method that will steer the world clearly away from the smoke. Hi, my name is Max Wolff, sophomore in material sciences and engineering here at Texas A&M University, and I've come to you today with several solutions for the problem of pollution. Today, I'll talk to you about money incentives for local governments for adopting clean energy, focusing on energy efficiency, and why adopting nuclear power can be a better help to our world than the other two. Let's start off with the typical first thing that people think of when it comes to clean energy: solar panels. More specifically, we're going to take a look at incentivizing local governments to implement solar panels into their housing. Spending money on local government isn't a technical problem anymore. It's more of an economic and production standpoint problem. Those such as engineers and scientists can now focus their efforts not on lowering pollution, but on lessening the effects of the pollution itself. Shafiqur Rahman's Cost of Solar Energy Generated Using PV Panels reports that the current average energy produced is as much as 10,077 megawatts a year. And the prospect of this spending program is to raise that average significantly. However, even given these money incentives, both the citizens and governments of these nations don't provide a large impact into the problem that's being proposed, which is getting rid of pollution. Sung Yun Kim, in the case of air pollution in Vietnam, states that while local air pollution contributes to awareness and dissatisfaction with the government, support for effective policy measures depends on education levels. And if that's the case, then it would lead to the assumption that the government shouldn't get money for funding clean energy practices, but simply providing a better education to their residents. Without evidence, it's not providing these incentives that don't provide help, it's that they don't provide enough help for our current problem. While solar panels do reduce the amount of carbon pollution in the atmosphere, the main producers of this carbon pollution is factories and large-scale companies that can't be managed as easily as the real estate agencies. Thus, incentivizing governments to implement cleaner energy is a start. However, other more efficient alternatives would prove to be worthwhile to look at. For instance, what if we took our existing energy sources and just made them better? For our second strategy, we're going to look at making energy production with our current resources, like coal and fuel, more efficient than they currently are. In saying that a larger scale energy company, like a factory that burns coal for energy, produces more carbon pollution than the real estate industry, it's reasonable to look at how much carbon they produce and how to cut that back. In The Impact of Energy Management Control Systems of Energy Efficiency, Mike Schultz states that implementation of energy management crowd control systems could be an effective lever for companies to enhance their production systems and operations towards energy efficiency. However, in that same report, he acknowledges that empirical evidence for these tests are missing, and since there haven't been any tests, there's nothing to prove that it'll work. With that, it would tend to be risky to implement this high-cost effort into finding out that it doesn't pay off in the long run, or possibly even make matters worse. The next facet of energy efficiency looks directly at improving a company's energy performance, and consequently reducing it by making these improvements across the board. As you can see on the screen, there is something called PCM, and this is a high-quality insulator. In Saeed Esbabi's case study, The Effects of Using PCM in Building Materials for Energy Saving, they propose specifically that there's a 30% decrease in the total heat energy consumed, and that less energy can overall be spent on heating and cooling of the buildings. Again, this does help, but this provides the same problem as the government incentives. There's nothing being done to reduce the current amount of carbon in the air, only just slow it down. So there needs to be some sort of method for producing the same amount of energy while also being able to clean carbon, right? That's where the literal power of nuclear energy comes into play. It's got lower carbon generation, a vastly higher energy output, and with that output, the ability to literally reverse the carbon pollution process. First off, let's talk about the lower carbon generation. The problem with both solar panels and energy efficiency is that they both still produce substantial amounts of carbon. With solar panels, it's in producing the panels, and with energy efficiency, it's just necessarily slowing down the processing. It's unlikely that either of those can compete with something that has as low, if not zero, carbon output as nuclear energy. Marianne Sullivan's The Future of Nuclear Power points out that the case for nuclear remains strong. It is a low-carbon baseload power that drives strong economic development. Second, nuclear energy has a massive output that could easily surpass other renewable energy resources. It's got an incredibly high capacity factor, which is the amount of time it can produce at maximum power, of 93%, whereas coal and natural gas reach at 48 and 57% respectively. Nuclear energy already accounts for 20% of our current power generation, so it wouldn't be a massive immediate change just to get it started from the get-go. As you can see on the screen as well, nuclear energy is able to produce so much more in 3 months since it runs at a much higher capacity. Finally, because of its high energy generation, it's able to physically reverse the pollution process. The process releases energy as it's created, so to reverse it, you need to put energy back in. Given the excess power that nuclear energy creates, you could take a small fraction of that power, divert it towards reversing the pollution process, and simply start cleaning up the carbon that's already in our atmosphere. So, in conclusion, it's clear to see that nuclear power not only creates less carbon emissions than the other two methods, but can actually clear any sort of carbon emissions that arise from the other tried and true methods. I talked today about government incentives and energy efficiency, and then talked about how nuclear power beats both of it in both decreased carbon emissions and rectifying the errors of the past. That ever-present threat that I mentioned at the start doesn't have to be there. We just have to turn our heads to the future of nuclear engineering. Thank you for listening to me today.